yo no la conozco mucho, la conozco más de lo que dicen de ella. Entonces, pues ya tú sabes que lo que dice uno de las personas no siempre es lo mismo lo que es la persona y a veces sí.
Exactly. Sorry if I'm in the way. Improvising.
¿Tú estás trabajando ahorita o tú tienes algo?
Alright, we are going to get started. Should I turn this on? Just in case it's right now, it's nice. I have to project a little bit less. So sorry about the wait. We were really trying to make this accessible for everyone and just having some. We did like 3 tech checks, and we're having some technical difficulties with YouTube, so really apologize about that, but we don't have much time, so we'll get started. First things first, if y'all could fill out that question, if you didn't already do that, that would be great. If not, take a picture of it so that I can get off the screen and then just move forward with everything. This is our first presentation and our first attempt at live streaming, so we appreciate grace, and I'm so sorry. I will try to talk at an excessive speed, but now we're running a little bit late. So, bye everyone. My name is Siobhan. Yiyam, Baham, Nonton Siobhan Yaka, Nona Hachimayam, Vito Zanielovich. I am Hachman Nation and San Diego. It's really nice to meet you today. So, as I said, my family's a Hachman Nation. This is going to be a little bit of a family story to begin to let you know how we all ended up here. But we're the original peoples of Orange County. Our territory goes from Long Beach down to northern San Diego County and east to about California Mountain. And that's my ancestors' house, the Cotto Adobe. It's a historic landmark. There's like a thing about the submission to the historic landmark thing. It's like a national landmark, but some man owns it, and I guess it's his like man cave class check. I don't know how that works, but that's where we're from, and it's in the San Juan Capistrano Valley, just down the road from the Mission and Ortega Freeway. This is my family. On the far left, we have Miguel Carta and his family. On the far right, we have my great-great-great-grandmother, Trinidad Carta, and her father, Alejo, and her sister. There is a wedding ring on Trinidad's finger, if you look really closely. And she had to leave California shortly after this photo was taken because of bounties on California Indians at the time. She ended up in Tucson, Arizona, where she then caught tuberculosis and died. So that kind of severed off our family from our language, our community, and a lot of things, basically. But on the left, we have my grandfather as a baby, and we have his mother. And on the right, we have my yaya, my tata, my grandfather, and my Uncle Paul. Paul's going to be the focus of this little story right here. He is my mother's brother, obviously, and very much a mama's boy, always with my yaya, very cute kid. These are some of the, I would say, they're the most recent photos of my Uncle Paul, but we don't have a lot of photos after this point. You can see he was very beautiful, one of the funniest people you've ever met. He really loved movies. He had a large collection of movie posters, Wizard of Oz lunchboxes, that kind of thing. And you can probably tell that I'm talking about Paul in past tense. He was only born in 1964, but I don't have any photos pretty much after this time because he really didn't like having his photo taken after he was very sick with HIV/AIDS. I was born in 1993, and unfortunately, for all the time that I knew him, he looked nothing like those photos. He was gaunt, sallow, bedbound, and he had to give himself injections daily, including in his eyes. And he died of HIV/AIDS complications in 2002. It doesn't escape me that a lot of people my age have not watched an AIDS death, let alone known somebody who got sick during the original epidemic in the 80s, but us as Indigenous people have. Watching Paul's fade of life and loss of ability and his isolation due to his immunocompromised status changed me and radicalized me even as a really young person. In my might have noticed I said Yaya earlier. My grandmother's from Athens. My grandfather brought her over when he was drafted, so she kind of gets a colonizer pass. But he really wanted to see my big fat Greek wedding. Like I said, he was a mama's boy and spent a lot of time with my Yaya. But it was released August 2nd, 2002, and he died October 31st, 2002. Due to his illness and his severely immunocompromised status, he wasn't able to go to a movie theater, so he was never able to see it, and my Yaya could never bring herself to watch it without him. And that is not dissimilar to immunocompromised people today who are also losing access to movie theater and basically everything else in life. When Paul first got diagnosed with HIV, he understood it to be a death sentence, as many did at that time. And in response, he reacted with trauma. Can't really blame him. He used more drugs. He was unkind to his body. And due to this, he progressed to AIDS status rather quickly and was pretty severe. He did progress to AIDS status before AZT was the first antiviral approved by the FDA, which was in March 1987. But he was never able to make significant gains in his status, and it was a slow but also fast descent into debility for the rest of his life. And he was a member of Being Alive San Diego, which is a local HIV elite. Many people know that COVID is a threat to their lives, but they'll often tell us things like, I dissociate because it's just too much for me to think about, and they aren't that sick yet, and like Paul, they continue to put their lives in danger because they want to live their lives. And I hope, if you resonate with that, and the hopelessness about COVID, that by the end of this presentation, you will feel empowered to find new ways to respond to the pandemic. The HIV/AIDS epidemic and COVID pandemic have a lot in common. The biomechanics, which I'll get to in a bit, but even more so the government's lack of adequate response or drive for prevention and treatment of COVID and long COVID, and the CDC propaganda that has manufactured consent for endless infections by creating the unknown other, the person who's vulnerable to COVID but definitely isn't you. And as we'll see later, Grand Fury, which was an HIV/AIDS activism group focused around making art that disturbed and stirred people. One of their famous pieces of work was with the phrase, "Women don't get AIDS, they just die from it." And like, healthy people don't get COVID, they don't get long COVID, they just die of sudden heart failure. And so we are all vulnerable, and it was true then and it's true now. I am, you are, we are all vulnerable to being disabled or killed by COVID, and the risk is cumulative. In every infection, your chances of being disabled or killed are multiplied exponentially. So first, we're going to, here's some of Grand Fury's art and ACT UP art, and also long COVID activists who, very much like AIDS activists, are begging for a cure, begging for antivirals, and be taken seriously. So getting into the biomechanics of COVID that prematurely age us, the government really pushed the you do you approach to COVID, but the problem is they aren't telling people the facts about how COVID harms us. And even more diabolical, they kind of quietly publish this information without letting anyone know. Never announcing it, certainly never having the CDC spokespeople come out and tell you that information. The same kind of media experts get re-quoted and quoted and quoted ad nauseum, but a lot of general population does not have media literacy, though actually I don't think that person is a great source for that information. So puts us in a bad situation. So COVID isn't the cold or a flu, then what is it? Here's one research paper that finds, taken together, the investigators write that these findings suggest that SARS-CoV-2 infection damages CD8 T cell response akin to the effect observed in earlier studies showing long-term damage to the immune system after infection with viruses such as hepatitis C or HIV. So, right there, COVID does damage your T cells, which means getting sick by it does not give you immunity if it's actually damaging the cells in your body that create immunity and help you become immune. So, very similar to HIV in that aspect. And there are studies upon studies indicating that even mild COVID-19 infections cause long-lasting and very possibly permanent damage to the immune system. And here's a scary part though. Without treatment, how quickly can a person living with HIV become ill? This is from the WHO. And on average, people with HIV who are not diagnosed or taking antiretrovirals, it takes about 5 to 10 years, or 10 to 15 years for it to become an AIDS diagnosis. Now what we're actually seeing with COVID is that that's happening a lot quicker. People are reaching lymphocytemia, which is a clinical state of damage to your lymphocytes, which are a type of immunity cell, and they're reaching that in 1, 3, 5 years, whereas HIV takes about 10 to 15 years on average to become AIDS. So that is a lot faster of a timeline. Something else that's similar to HIV is that COVID causes viral persistence and has viral reservoirs, which means that the virus continues to replicate in your body even after your acute infection. They're finding a lot of this in the gut, but they're also finding it in blood marrow and even in your bones. There's a study with sawdust, and I think Finland, skull sawdust, and they found infected virus in the sawdust from skulls from autopsies, which is pretty scary to think about. So the virus can continue to replicate within our bodies. And here are just more and more studies talking about the immune damage. And they are actually, many long COVID patients are on HIV antivirals for their long COVID. They're not working perfectly, but it is giving relief for some people. So just another kind of sign of how similar they can really be in terms of damaging your immunity. Again, here's the skull sawdust one. Found in bone marrow. This is bad. Very astute observation of me. The other thing is that, of the many things, is that COVID actually ages your body. Your organs can be aging 3 to 4 years faster per this study. And organ damage a year later, 59%. The accelerated biological aging. So, COVID ages you biologically. How does that happen? This is a lot of science stuff that I'm throwing at you. This one quote, nevertheless, it was shown here that individuals belonging to a group of COVID-19 survivors exhibited a significant acceleration of their biological age, occurring mainly in younger individuals. So this was associated with telomere shortening. So this idea that you're young and COVID's not going to hurt you because you're young is false. They're actually finding more damage in some ways in younger folks than they are in folks who are older, which may come as a shock to people. But what are telomeres and why do they matter? Deep inside cells at the tips of thread-like chromosomes, structures known as telomeres protect chromosomes from deterioration. A bit like the way caps at the end of shoelaces prevent fraying, telomeres naturally shorten as people age. Short telomeres affect parts of the body where stem cells actively divide, including bone marrow, skin, tissues, lining of the lungs, and the digestive tract. Short telomeres can lead to scarring in the lungs, liver, narrowing of the digestive tract, bone marrow, failure, and immune system deficiency. So basically, your cells rapidly divide to keep you healing. Stem cells are regenerative. They're what help you heal anything. But as you get older, about 25, that process starts to get slower. And that's just kind of the process of aging and becoming disabled as we age. But what COVID does is it gets you there a lot faster. So they're finding that telomeres can be shortened kind of on a basis of like 10 to 20 years in advance. So you're actually, it damages your body's regenerative process on a cellular level by like 10 to 20 years of aging, which is pretty intense and severe. COVID is also a vascular disease, which means that it is a disease of the blood cells. So it's not technically a respiratory disease. It is transmitted through the respiratory tract, but it is a disease of your blood cells. It even changes blood cell morphology, which is like the shape of your blood cells. You can see here some of that altered morphology in the red blood cells, which is also good. And then, sorry, this is the really science-heavy part, but since COVID, heart attacks and strokes have risen sharply amongst young people the most, even healthy people, even athletes in previous peak health, and sudden cardiac deaths in athletes has skyrocketed. So here's a couple quotes right here. Although heart attacks in people 18 to 44 are rare, they have increased more than 66% since 2019. In another one, studies have shown enlarged or weakened heart muscles in young athletes who had COVID-19 previously, but no symptoms or signs of a heart problem. There have even been cases of sudden cardiac death in these types of healthy individuals. So it doesn't matter if you're a peak athlete, if you're in shape, quote unquote, it can still significantly damage your heart and your blood cells and your vascular system. And we even find with COVID that sometimes, a lot of the time, exertion is what causes more damage with people. It's really important after a COVID infection that you really rest, radical rest. Even watching TV can stress your body out to the point that it can cause significant damage. So here's a little graph right here of the increase in sudden cardiac death among athletes since the bottom line there. This is 2021. And then a little quote right here. They found the highlight the disturbing trend of sudden cardiac death in the wake of COVID-19. While sudden cardiac death in athletes is relatively rare, even a single case is too many, especially considering most are preventable. Also, the risk of long COVID is cumulative with every infection that you get. So if you have one infection and you are fine, that does not mean your next infection will be fine. And they find in general 3 infections or more, you're going to be running the risk of long COVID kind of significantly. So each infection is going to do cumulative damage to your body. This is from Canada, and this is June 2023. And here's another one. This is from, I don't have them here on this one, but you can see it also has the pathologies broken down. So hospitalization by 3 or more infections, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, fatigue, kidney disease, diabetes. Every infection is going to get you closer to long COVID. And each subsequent COVID infection will increase your risk of developing chronic issues like diabetes, kidney disease, organ failure, even mental health problems. This dispels the myth that repeated brushes with the virus are mild and you don't have to worry about it. It's akin to playing Russian roulette. They found it has a devastating effect on every organ, and studies vary widely, but sometimes between 10 to 50% of people who had the virus report having long-term symptoms. And the adverse effects from 2 infections are worse than 1, 3 infections worse than 2, meaning it's cumulative. Okay, that was a lot. So how did we get here, and how did they convince us that we should get infected with this over and over again if it's so dangerous? So Julia Doubleday, I highly recommend going to read her blog, The Gauntlet. She's brilliant. She is now disabled by long COVID, but this article is fantastic and breaks down kind of how the media was complicit in crafting the way that we've gone along with this message that it's okay to get COVID. So lie number 1, vaccines will end the pandemic. They should have never said that. Okay, they really should have never said that because there was no real world application. Number 1. Number 2, intramuscular vaccines, which means your typical vaccine that goes into your muscle, actually don't produce robust immunity in the respiratory tract, which again is how COVID spreads through the air. So we would need vaccines that sterilize or prevent infection. This is why you might hear some chatter sometimes about nasal vaccines, because we actually do need the immunity to target the place, the site of infection, really, for a disease like this. Number 3, we didn't mandate vaccines or get enough of the population vaccinated. You've probably heard herd immunity used wrong all the time, like, oh, everyone's infected, so now we have herd immunity. That is not what that means. and definitely doesn't apply to a virus that makes you get sicker when you get it. Herd immunity actually means the majority of the population is vaccinated, so that people who are too immunocompromised to take a vaccine are then protected by the herd because the virus cannot circulate within the population. So that has been used wrong even by science communicators, which the propaganda is intense. So, and number 4, despite knowing this knowledge, the CDC director lied to the public, stating that vaccinated people could not get infected or spread COVID. Lie number 2, breakthrough infections are rare. So once they figured out that people were still getting infected with the virus after getting vaccinated, then the story became, okay, well, some people will get will get sick, but it's going to be rare, and it's going to be mild, and they're going to be okay, and it's fine and dandy. So Julia breaks down actual articles that shows the timeline of each article and how the media kind of built this narrative that allowed us to be propagandized and go along with the plan to be continually reinfected. So she said, yet months earlier, the director Walensky had highlighted on national TV that breakthrough cases were not expected. In fact, she explicitly stated that it was the lack of breakthrough infections itself that would be the end of the pandemic. This is the first slight narrative change Americans had to swallow. Okay, so vaccines aren't going to prevent every infection 100% of the time, but as of summer 21, they're going to prevent most infections. And most fully vaccinated people will never be infected, and those who are will have a mild case. The implication of the lack of sterilizing immunity, that vaccines alone can't end the pandemic, is never made. Number 3, only high-risk people should worry. So I'm going to quote Julie again. The schism between the vulnerable people who are in danger and normal people who should ignore them will be widened and cemented in the public view over the course of the next 2 years. But the type of people who fall into the vulnerable bucket continues to expand. The important thing is to get the main body of the public seeing those who will be harmed as an out-group. So instead of telling you that actually anyone can be harmed by COVID and we are all vulnerable, they cast it as somebody who's not you. Some mythical person, even though we know depression is indicated as higher risk for developing long COVID, even though we know that diabetes, even though we know that very simple conditions that a lot of the population has, asthma, already places you in that high-risk group. How many people have asthma, but they're told that it's not that they don't have to worry? It becomes a mythical person that could definitely not be any of us. Line number 4, Omicron is mild. This came from one singular article out of South Africa, that Omicron was mild, but really what the article neglected to say was that Omicron was more mild than the Delta variant, which was much more dangerous than the original COVID strain, but Omicron was about equivalent in danger to the original COVID strain. Line number 5, COVID is over. So basically by this point, the Biden administration majorly flopped, and they could not politically take the responsibility for that. And so the press manufactured propaganda and shaped Americans' expectations of what adequate pandemic response was. To quote Julie, we went from celebrating March 2021 because we would not be infected, to celebrating the rarity of infection, to celebrating the mildness of infection, to celebrating that those who are harmed won't be us. So they kept moving the goalpost and moving the goalpost and moving the goalpost. So the political project of normalizing transmitting COVID and casting basic scientific mitigations as bad, weird, mean, and impossible was a fantastic coup for the far right. The utter rejection of state responsibility for public welfare, and those who have been harmed are cast as weak, lying, lame, unlucky, unusual, uncool, rare, bad, mean, aggressive, psychologically disturbed, and or crazy. And she also goes to say, whereas HIV, malaria, TB, and polio elimination are long-term acknowledged goals of public health, elimination became a dirty word in the COVID era, despite having the technical know-how. Another part of this is data suppression. So everyone laughed, everyone on the left, liberals, leftists laughed when Trump said, if we stop testing, we'd have fewer cases. But then when Biden did it, suddenly everyone went along with it. And we were like, oh, that's okay. That's okay if we cut all the testing, then it's fine. By May 10th of 2024, there was no longer requirement for hospitals to report COVID infections. They weren't testing people upon admission. They weren't reporting COVID tests to the federal government. So our data basically disappeared. This was a meme on the internet, but pretty much, I'll show you. The new CDC map just came out. That's not a very good map, is it? You wouldn't look at that and say, I can tell which state has high COVID rates, right? This is what the CDC map originally looked like to show you wastewater levels of viral activity, and this is what they changed it to. So, as a journalist, making this map would get you fired. Well, it used to. It would have gotten you fired in the past, but suddenly it became like, okay. But it's very obviously manipulation of visual data to make you feel like things aren't that bad. Because if you see a red map, obviously that signals psychologically danger, caution, watch out. But when you have the Blue Gene Committee map, that doesn't really strike people as, oh gosh, looks like the rates are really high right now. Another problem is that people will say fully vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. If you haven't stayed up to date with every single COVID booster that has come up, they're not really a booster because the virus has changed so much that if you only got your original set of vaccines, you are no longer immune to COVID. You do not have immunity to the more recent strains. Like, you have to be getting every single one because the virus continues to change, which is why you can get infected and then get infected again in 30 days because you probably got infected with a different strain of COVID because so many are circulating. So this is from January 2024, and the amount of US adults that were fully vaccinated, as in up to date on all the vaccines, was about 20% of the population. So most of the population, a good 80% of the population, is actually not inoculated against any of the circulating COVID vaccines. It's also mutating too rapid for vaccine development to keep up with, but they're still very important to get for reasons I just mentioned. And because people have been partially vaccinated, unmasked, getting infected, we're actually kind of teaching the virus how to evade immunity, which is also not very good. Another issue is that basically not taking COVID precautions when you're financially and socially able to, meaning social anxiety / feeling weird, aren't the biggest factors are the biggest factors stopping you, is capitulation to capitalistic interest, whether it's you getting out and spending money or you getting sick and needing Paxlovid, because this was a communication from the Pfizer group president that said an end to mask mandates would generate a demand for Paxlovid. So very much upfront said, if we take away mask mandates, people will need our drug, and then we're going to make more money. That doesn't sound very good, right? Not fun. Other factors in tomfoolery in the propaganda campaign. The isolation guidelines were shortened to 5 days on request of Delta Airlines CEO. No way on this earth is 5 days enough for you to isolate. You're typically infectious for a lot longer than that. They cut telehealth benefits. They cut wastewater monitoring, so all of our data that we have to even monitor infections is severely limited. They cut testing sites. Again, everyone laughed when Trump said it, but when Biden did it, everyone was like, yeah, I get it too. They're not providing rapid tests year-round, and rapid tests barely work. And then there was this whole issue with HIPAA, the CDC infection control body. They tried to insist that surgical masks were equivalent to diseases, that surgical masks were equivalent to N95s, that the disease was spread by droplets, and all around tried to denounce the knowledge that we have about airborne viruses, and the fact that it is spread by the air, and that we need higher quality masks that do not allow air inside, so a surgical mask does not protect you. The tension that we as a society are facing is the tension between those who believed and acted on the government's propaganda, are unaware, unwilling, or too propagandized to confront reality, and those who are reacting with common sense to physics, virology, immunology, and collectivism. And that's the end of the first really heavy part, and my partner my friend Mar, is going to come up and go on. Are we going to the break first?
Yeah, quick break and then...
We're going to do a quick break first so you can decompress from all of that. Okay, so we're going to go to, pull up the question. Alt-tab. I don't think it's open.
about 5 minutes maybe. And then we'll get back to that question that we had at the beginning. I think split into a couple groups. And are we doing half and half?
Yeah, we can do half and half.
Okay, so you'll have to take a break, and then once you're back, we're going to have a little bit of discussion over the results from that class. So go ahead and take a break.
Promise the second part is really good, don't run away. Yeah.
Can you really take over? My body hurts. This is not what I want.
That's the end of the science part.
I can't. I don't know if I feel enough or not. I'm like, my body hurts. I lied. CO2 right now. Let me show everybody the CO2. We got the air purifiers. CO2. Let's do a sticker tour.
It's el vampiro, so at the end of the day, it's just Maxine like yeah.
So I'm just gonna be over.
I'll be wearing a mask that mirrors the people that there's a danger there and maybe that we would have wear masks, right? But everybody's infected, including myself.
Okay, we have the results to the little Mentimeter up here. Some things to look at.
That's why I was like, when people learn,
My mom says I'm no fun because I always talk about how the world is ending. You can't hire me for parties. So we've got some interesting results here. Because it seems that everyone is relaxed about it, so I figure it's okay. Alright, do we want to chocolate hungry? Yeah.
back to folks to consider taking all the questions. So yeah, we'll have about, what, 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes towards the end. If anybody from either group would like to share afterwards, try and think of a
heard
Oh,
difficult.
Mike.
Oh. Okay. So some things that I heard were barriers with cost. We live in a terrible late-stage capitalism. Hard for people to afford masks. If that's the case for you, we have them free, just so you know. You don't have to make that choice ever again. Another thing that I heard was that it's really hard to tell what's true because you're hearing so much information and you can't tell who is giving you the accurate information, and you also have social pressure from people that you're around. I heard also grief and like a loss of maybe like gumption due to grief and losses caused by COVID. I heard a need to mask for immunocompromised loved ones. I heard a drive to mask from losses from COVID, and I heard folks with long COVID talking about their experience as well and why they now have to take pretty serious precautions. Anything else that someone wants to add that didn't cover in there that they thought was interesting? That about cover the things you heard on this side? Mostly? Yeah.
I mean, I guess most of the athletes are themselves hearing about like schools.
Right.
Like, I don't know if you want to add to that point. Sorry, about like schools, like saying that like kids aren't getting COVID and like, yeah, like how you had mentioned how the schools that you were working for were saying that the kids like couldn't get COVID, and so they weren't taking precautions. Other people were mentioning like their workplaces, like they work with like scientists or like people who are supposed to be informed about this stuff, but they're not taking precautions either. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that. I guess I also wanted to mention something that I didn't get to mention in the breakouts, but how quarantine policies in prisons, for instance, didn't do anything to prevent the virus, and those policies lasted much longer than policies in those states as a form of punishment and separation, and they use it a lot to like put people in solitary confinement and stuff like that. Even people were also trying, I think in like San Quentin or something, it happened in multiple prisons, but people were trying to even spread COVID because they thought maybe it's a chance to get out. That's an environment when people aren't seeing adequate nurses. They don't want to talk to the nurses because the nurses act like cops. And, that's not true. I don't know what else wants to speak.
You got a hand back there?
I didn't get a chance to mention this, but I take precautions because I am stubborn as shit. And I refuse to be part of this lie. I refuse to be part of this injustice. Fuck that. Fuck that shit. I'm so angry. And this mask is for my protection, but it's also my statement.
Yeah, a lot of people watch The Hunger Games and like didn't internalize that like, hey, fashion can actually say a lot about your politics and maybe move people. Kind of interesting. A lot of people like that series, but we forgot that part. All right, and now we are going to go on to Mar, who's going to talk to us about disability justice and some other stuff.
Hi everyone, my name is Mar. I want to take a step back a bit from talking about COVID specifically and talk more about concepts of ableism and eugenics. And then we can talk more about COVID and how this plays into it. Imani Barbarin, a disabled activist who you may have seen online at Crutches and Spice. She said a couple of times something similar to this quote. Every form of marginalization is disabling. So what does she mean by that? Let's explore a few different types of marginalizations. these obviously aren't all of them, but a few basic marginalizations include class, race, gender, sexuality, size, disability. All of these can lead to more disability, more loss of health. How does that happen? What do I mean by that? Thinking about questions like, who has access to unpolluted air, clean water, things like that, and what does not having access do over the long term to your health? Who has access to care? Like, who has health insurance? Who can take time off when they're sick? Who has doctors that actually listen to them when they come in for help? And how does oppression impact the body? So how does the lived experience of racism, sexism, any of these marginalizations, what does that do to the body? There's a lot of ways that oppression can impact the body, but I want to bring up one example of autoimmune diseases. So your immune system fights off infections and basically tries to protect your body. Autoimmune diseases are when your immune system kind of overreacts and actually attacks your body. Autoimmune diseases include stuff like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, celiac disease. There has been, studies have shown that autoimmune diseases are often triggered or by stress. And it's also shown that people like women and BIPOC folks are more likely to have autoimmune diseases. So from all that research, we can sort of extrapolate that the experience of racism, sexism, the lived experience of oppression can literally make your body sick with stuff like autoimmune diseases. So bringing COVID back into this, if we know that every marginalization is disabling, COVID makes this all more true. I also want to name that disability itself is a marginalization that can happen to anyone, and COVID also increases that chance as well, as we saw by Ship's presentation talking about long COVID. But going through these marginalizations again, from early on in the pandemic, we saw that there were racial disparities when it came to COVID deaths. Black, brown, and indigenous people were way more likely to be hospitalized and die from COVID, and that's still true, along with, now that we see long COVID results, we do see that people of color are more likely to develop long COVID. Additionally, studies have also confirmed that when you tell white people about these racial disparities, it makes them think that they're less likely to be harmed from COVID, and therefore it's okay to not mask, and they're less likely to be in favor of things like mask mandates. So it's kind of multiply self-fulfilling in the racial disparities. In terms of gender and sexuality, women are way more likely to develop long COVID. There's also research that shows that bisexual people and trans people are more likely to get long COVID. And so basically, people with marginalized genders and sexualities are more likely to get long COVID. Class is one that has also been pretty clear from the beginning of the pandemic. If you remember, shelter in place, who actually got to stay at home, work from home, not be exposed to COVID immediately every day, and who were deemed essential workers and had to be in public without masks, without protection. This is obviously still true with long COVID and where we're at currently. This research is from 2023, and it says that half of California adults with the lowest incomes experienced long COVID. So, and Shiv talked about this a little bit, but, you know, chronically ill, immunocompromised, disabled people, high-risk people. This is a category that they at least admit is still high risk for COVID. But one thing I want to point out about this marginalization is that it can always grow. There are people who aren't in this group, but one COVID infection can put them into this group. Additionally, there are people who are in this group who don't even know they're in this group, either because of not being diagnosed, not having access to the right care, or having something that takes a long time to diagnose, or because we don't have a lot of education about who's actually in this group, and the mainstream propaganda wants people to assume it's someone else. So this is from the CDC website. Part of their list of underlying conditions and higher risks for severe COVID-19. It's a really long list, like longer than you would think. And it includes some really common conditions that you might have, people you know might have. For me, I'm autistic, so I'm on this list already. I also have some other things that put me on this list. But it definitely is a larger group than we think of. This isn't some other group that's able to protect themselves. This is us. So COVID can disable or harm anyone, but it really is the people who are most marginalized who are harmed the most. In this section, I want to step back and talk a little bit about disability justice. We want to talk about respecting the limits of our bodies and examining PrEP time in 5 years into this pandemic. So, a little bit of history about disability justice, and in general, the disability movements in the U.S. In around the 60s, disability rights activism was starting to gain some traction. A lot was inspired by other civil rights movements. And initially, there was some really radical multiracial organizing. The first disability rights legislation that was passed federally was called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and it was signed in '73, but it wasn't implemented for many years. And so groups of disabled folks across the country organized and occupied federal buildings in order to push for the implementation. They won it because a group in San Francisco occupied a federal building for almost a whole month. And this is still the longest occupation of a federal building that's ever happened. And it was a group of disabled people and community allies. And the reason why I want to talk about this specifically is that it was community allies like the Black Panthers and other groups. And they wouldn't have succeeded without those connections. Specifically, I want to shout out Brad Lomax, who was a disabled Black Panther. And like this multi-sectoral cross-movement solidarity was really incredible and really powerful. Unfortunately, in the mainstream disability rights movement, it didn't last. As the disability rights movement became more formalized, the movement started to represent a more privileged set of disabled people looking for things like a seat at the table. They started to form nonprofits or join governmental roles. So, as a result, in the early 2000s, a group of BIPOC disabled organizers came up with the concept of disability justice. They wanted to examine how ableism interacts with other marginalizations, sort of go back to the cross-movement solidarity from the early days. I recommend everyone check out Sins Invalid if you haven't heard of it. It is a disability justice organization. These are the 10 principles of disability justice that you can kind of read about on their website. And those principles are intersectionality, leadership of the most impacted, anti-capitalist politics, cross-movement solidarity, recognizing wholeness, sustainability, commitment to cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation. So the reason why I wanted to talk about disability justice tonight is that a lot of us who do organizing or advocacy in COVID, around COVID, see ourselves as part of the disability justice movement. And I want to make sure that we center ourselves and learn from those who came before us, and so we can learn from our disabled ancestors and elders and organizers who've been doing this for a long time, especially as a lot of people who are involved with COVID organizing might be newer to these spaces, and since COVID is a mass disabling event, there's a lot of newly disabled people who we need to learn our histories, and we need to learn from those who've been doing the work. So I want to talk about the concept of crip time. In Ellen Samuels' essay, 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time, she states that her friend Alison Kafer says, rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, crip time bends the clock to meet disabled minds and bodies and minds. So what is crip time? Crip time is a term that disabled people use for having a non-normative relationship with time. As disabled people, time moves differently for us. Taking care of our bodies, our minds, making appointments, recovering from activities, dealing with flare-ups, these all take up time in ways that we cannot control or avoid or even reschedule. And this is often on top of the things that most people do, like going to work or cooking dinner or doing your laundry. Capitalism values productivity over everything else, and disability and crip time is an affront to capitalism. Crip time means listening to our bodies instead of listening to the expectations of capitalism. So what do I mean when I'm talking about respecting the limits of our bodies? There are, of course, disabled people who don't live by crip time, who push themselves to appear as non-disabled as they possibly can. Internalized ableism is a really powerful force, and people really push themselves to appear non-disabled or appear productive despite disability. But the truth is that our bodies have limits, and enough pushing yourself, enough ignoring your body's signals, your body might tell you those limits without you, even if you don't want to listen. Sometimes you don't know you've hit it until your body makes sure you know it. It really takes practice, it takes intention, it takes disabled role models and doulas and disabled community to learn how to respect the limits of your body. And this is just such an important lesson right now as we're in this pandemic that is still causing new disabilities. There's been evidence that shows that long COVID is triggered by overexertion during COVID infections or after COVID infections. So ignoring your body and pushing yourself to be back at capitalist norms of productivity can actually cause disabilities like long COVID. And this isn't even a wild theory. This isn't a wild theory. It's becoming more recognized, even in more mainstream publications. So this is a Time article that says why you should rest a lot if you have COVID-19. So I want you to sit with these questions. You don't have to answer them out loud or anything, but I want folks to think about and just reflect on, in this timeline of an ongoing pandemic with no end in sight, how many COVID infections have you had? And thinking about how sometimes COVID infections don't cause any symptoms. Are you testing regularly? When you do feel sick, do you just test with a rapid test once? Because that might not catch it. So how many infections may you have had if you consider asymptomatic infections or false negatives on a test? How have those infections impacted your health, your body? Whether or not you've been diagnosed or think you have long COVID, have you noticed any changes in your health after a COVID infection? Do you believe that they have impacted you? Are you worried about impacts that you might not have noticed yet? How many more infections can your body stand? Does respecting the limits of your body mean reinfecting it with this virus year after year? Or does respecting the limits of your body mean protecting your only body and reducing the spread to protect others? So just sitting with those questions. But we want to talk about where we're at now. We are basically at the 5-year mark for this pandemic. In March, it will mark 5 years since the WHO declared COVID a global pandemic. I want to note that while both the WHO and CDC have declared public health emergencies over, the WHO still explicitly says there's a pandemic, and even if no authority recognized it, that doesn't make it disappear. It still is a widespread infectious disease that is all over the world, which is quite literally what the word pandemic means. I want to recommend the Death Panel podcast. It's a podcast about the political economy of health. They've been chronicling what they call the sociological production of the end of the pandemic, and they've been talking about this for years, about pandemic minimalization and the political project that it took to get the vast majority of people to ignore the pandemic around us. They recently put out a reflection of the 5th year of the pandemic called COVID Year 5. I believe it's still behind a paywall, but the first hour of the episode is available for free. And this is a quote from that episode from one of the hosts, Beatrice Adler-Bolton. "Each mask worn now is an act of defiance. It is a refusal to fit neatly into the state's framework of how we're supposed to be in the world." So, 5 years of this pandemic, where are we at now? COVID is still spreading. It spreads throughout the year. Last summer we had a huge summer surge, so it doesn't even spread seasonally like some other viruses do. There's no widespread mitigation measures. We are instead facing mask bans instead of mask mandates. We are also facing climate crises, which, as we see a few hours north of here, creates a need for PPE like masks. And when there are government officials like Mayor Karen Bass of LA, who's been demonizing masks for a while now and trying to get them banned, which makes them even less equipped than they normally would be to handle disasters like what's happening now. Community groups like Mask Block LA and others have been doing amazing work distributing masks across the region. Where else are we now? More people are disabled from long COVID with no cures or clearly effective treatments. Bird flu and other threats are growing. Inside the belly of the beast of U.S. imperialism, we are facing an emboldened fascist administration with an explicit agenda against vaccines, masking, research, and public health and safety infrastructure. And this didn't come from nowhere. This didn't just pop up with Trump and RFK. What paved the way for this was Biden administration and liberals getting rid of mask mandates, participating in the pandemic normalization, and even, leftists and other groups, just basically any groups that decided to do away with mitigation measures were complicit in this. And so people who acknowledge all of this are living in a different reality than people who refuse to. Our presentation was titled Navigating Fractured Realities. This is the fracture. There are people who acknowledge the reality of what's happening and do what they can to fight back, make it better, protect themselves and others. And there are people who don't acknowledge it or pretend like they don't know it, and they go along with the majority who are not masking and are spreading this disease that is still killing and harming people. I want to name that for some people, the lockdowns, when you think of 2020, that never ended. For people who are severely immunocompromised, it's not safe to leave the house. For people who are so sick with long COVID or other illnesses, they may not be able to leave. And so, circling back to Crip Time, that Crip Time is time travel, that we are living in different timelines from, people don't see how other people are living. People don't understand how other people are living. So back to Ellen Samuels, disability and illness have the power to extract us from linear progressive time with its normative life stages and cast us into a wormhole of backward and forward acceleration, jerky stops and starts, tedious intervals, and abrupt endings. We who occupy the bodies of Crip Time know that we are never linear, and we rage silently, or not so silently, at the calm straightforwardness of those who live in the sheltered space of normative time. So, I know this presentation has gone long. We've had a late start, but this is sort of the final section where we're going to talk about turning rage into life-affirming systems and the need for clean air in the time of COVID. I want to first talk about grief and things that, people have lost in this pandemic, in these past 5 years. And I want to start by sharing a little bit of one thing that I've been grieving, something that I lost during this pandemic. So I want to talk about my mom. Her name was Heidi. She had rheumatoid arthritis, and she was infected with COVID in the fall of 2022. She survived that infection, but was basically, and a few months later in 2023, she was diagnosed more specifically with interstitial lung disease. Basically, COVID triggered her RA to impact her lungs. If you look up interstitial lung disease, which I have done when I heard the name of the disease, it says the prognosis is usually 3 to 5 years. She didn't even get that. In October of 2020, her lung disease, and because there was no more masking in the hospital, she was infected with COVID there. A few weeks later, in November, she died while still testing positive for COVID. She was only 62. Her father, my grandfather, is still alive and grieving her. I'm grieving her, as is the rest of my family. I like to talk about my mom when we're talking about timelines and fractured realities, because the pandemic minimization myths make you think the pandemic ended in 2023 or before then. And my mom's stories, like, our loss is an affront to that. She died after the public health emergency ended. Sorry. And she's not the only one. There are still people dying every week in this country. There's hundreds of deaths from COVID every week. And so, stepping back to what people have lost in this pandemic, not just me, lots of people have lost loved ones and are still losing loved ones. And that grief isn't as acknowledged. It's harder to have it acknowledged